Hello and welcome to another episode of this program. I always thank you for tuning in. In the last several episodes, we've been talking about how can we get a good grip on the Bible. That is, how can we benefit more? A lot of people are frustrated in terms of reading the Bible, understanding it. We just continue the chores without really getting the best out of it. And this is the fifth episode. The last episode, I spoke about meditation. And if you missed that, you may want to press pause on this one, go to our Facebook page, check out Tennis Television, check out our YouTube page, Tennis TV, or go to our website, www.tenet.tv, to catch up on the previous episodes. In this particular episode, I'm talking about bridging gaps to understanding the Bible. There are gaps between us and the Bible, and we need to bridge these gaps if we must get a good grip of the Bible. So I'm going to talk about a few of these uh, gaps that we need to bridge, and then I will be making some recommendations. The first thing I want to say is the fact that the Bible is a big book. You probably already know that, but it is worth repeating. And that is one of the reasons why many of us do not understand what we are reading. The Bible is made up of at least 7,000 words. It's even made difficult by the fact that it's written like a newspaper in many columns. And, depending on what size of Bible and the font, you may have as many as 1,500 pages. So if you are not careful, that in itself can be inundating, and it can help just to discourage you, and you don't even know where to start from. So, but you see, the Bible is made up of 66 books, 39 in the Old Testament and 27 in the New Testament. Now, the real way to describe the Bible is a library of books. Like I've said, it contains 66 books. So it is a big book because it's binded in one book. But if you look at it carefully, it is actually a library of books. In fact, the original name of the Bible, which is Biblia, actually means the books. So if you want to read a library of books, there is a way to read it. Somewhere behind me here is a set of books that my son has. I call it the Left Behind series, written by Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye. Now, there are probably 6-7 books in the series, but each one of them is self-contained. And I watch my son go pick one, read it, finish it, then he returns it and picks another one. Now, nobody read a book by reading the first chapter, reading the middle of it, and then maybe leaving it. If we're talking about the Left Behind series, if I read chapter 1 of the first episode, I go to the third in the series, I read the middle, and then I go to the very last of the book, I read the end of it. I will not get the main gist of the series. Rather, what is the best way to read it? Take one book at a time, start from the beginning and finish. Now, what I describe as the wrong way to approach the reading of a library or a series of books is what many of us do. Now, pause and ask yourself, have you ever started to read one book of the Bible and finish it? Or have you started and finished the Bible as a whole library? Most of us, especially with many devotionals, we find it a lot easier to read what the person who wrote the devotional is suggesting. Just read 3, 4, 5 verses and you think you've done well. You can satisfy yourself, your curiosity, but you can never be a good Bible student reading a book like that. What am I suggesting? What I'm saying is that you must take one book at a time and read it from the beginning to the end. Why? Nobody writes a book without having something major that he wants to pass across. Maybe 2, maybe 3 points that he wants to pass across. Any book whatsoever. So it's better to read the books of the Bible one book at a time, because each book was written with an intention, with a major message that the writer wants to pass across. Any book of the Bible at all. Let's start from the beginning. If you look at Genesis, for instance, it's like the executive summary of the whole of the Bible. And it answers many of the fundamental questions that we humans may have. What is the origin of this our world? Why do human beings exist? Why is there so much suffering? Is there something called sin? How should a man and a woman relate together? What is the original intention of family? Not the crazy ideas that people are bringing about regarding all these things I've mentioned. God has something in mind when He was creating the world, and the book of Genesis answers all these questions. And again, just like nobody writes a letter without having a reason why he was writing the letter. When I was much younger, I was known for writing letters. And sometimes all I wanted to do was to say, hello, how are you doing? Sometimes I write to my uncles and I say, I need this or I need that. You must have a reason before you start out to say you want to write a letter. So in the New Testament, we saw the apostles, especially Paul, writing many letters. And there is not one single letter that he wrote that doesn't have a meaning or that doesn't have a reason. So you must read. The better way to read the Bible is to read it one book at a time. For instance, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, they were written by a one particular author, but each author has a perspective to the story of Jesus. So don't just read here and there. Those are the reasons why we are not understanding the Bible the way we should. Now, let's talk about some of the gaps that we have between us and the Bible. I've spoken about the size of the book and the fact that you've got to pick it one book at a time. If all I get to achieve is to encourage you and to convince you to read the Bible one book at a time, it will benefit. I will be very happy. It will be enough reward for me. Now, one of the gaps that we have again is the gap of time. The latest book of the Bible that was written or compiled was written maybe 2,000 years ago. So there is a huge gap of time between where we are now and when those events actually happened. And we need to bridge that gap. Think about what the world looked like 2,000 years ago. Don't even talk about Genesis, which probably dates back to like 6,000 years ago. No internet, no electricity, no automobile. Don't even talk about aeroplane. They looked different, they dressed different, they spoke different. So it was a totally different world that they were living in. And even though God's word remains the same, it is timely and timeless, the time gap in between us may make some meanings of the words obscure. So you have to find a way to bridge the gap by putting yourself in that time. If you want to understand the Bible very well, you've got to actually be very imaginative and say, put yourself in the shoes of the people or the character that are being described. So there's a huge gap between us and the Bible times. And in order to be able to understand it, you may need to travel back in time in terms of your memory. And there are a lot of tools, a lot of aids. These days, I see Bibles that are illustrated, that are demonstrated in audio, in video. Those things help. And of course, commentaries and other materials help to be able to help us understand what exactly was happening in the Bible time. Now, the other gap that may be existing between us and the Bible is the language gap. It will interest you to know that the Bible was not originally written in English language, because the English as a language did not exist as at the time all the events were happening. So Jesus didn't speak English, because Greek was the language of the educated, just like English is the language predominantly of the educated in our world today. So majority of the Old Testament books were written in Hebrew. A few, maybe like the book of Nehemiah, Esther, and parts of Daniel, were written in Aramaic. Okay, but majority of the Old Testament books were written in Hebrew, and of course the New Testament was written in Greek. It therefore means that if we must understand what was being written and translated into English, you need to again travel back in time and say, what exactly was this saying before it was translated? Let me give you a very simple example. If you look at the word love, if you see it in your English Bible, in the English, love is love any day, anytime. But in the Greek, it is different. There are probably 3 or 4 variants of it. There is storge, there is storge talks about, love in the family, love between parents and the children. There is filial, which talks about, friendship. There is eros, which talks about sexual love between a man and a woman, and there is agape, which talks about unconditional love, which only God can give. So it helps a lot if you can dig deeper and say which one is it referring to. Simple things like, Peter, a name that has its origin in the Greek word Petra, which means rock. So that all of those can help you to understand a lot if you compare Peter, which means rock, to Simon, which means reed. So you can get a lot by just digging a little deeper and going backwards in the language. And please do not tell me that this is meant for preachers alone. No, we are all supposed to be students of the Bible. And if we are students, then we've got to work hard, dig deeper, and study the word. The other one, in terms of the gap, is the culture gap. There is a huge culture gap between what is existing today and the times that the Bible was written, whether Old Testament or New Testament. Like I said, dressed differently, was totally a different word, spoke differently. The way, the nuances, the way they built their surrounding, the way of doing things was totally different. So if you must read the New Testament, for instance, you've got to read it against the background of what was happening in those days. The Jews were being colonized by the Romans. So you've got to understand that there is a difference between a Roman soldier and an ordinary Jewish citizen. Or you've got to see how they relate to each other. I think of, the colonization in my part of the world. So you've got to look at all of this for you to be able to understand what was happening and what were the import of what is being said. For instance, in John chapter 4, the Gospel of John chapter 4, Jesus was talking to a Samaritan woman. And Jesus, Jewish, the woman Samaritan. If you want to be a good Bible student, you've got to understand the culture. And you know that there is a difference between Samaritan and Jew. I don't have all the time to break all of those down for you, but that is how you actually study and get a good grip of the Bible. Not to talk of, the Good Samaritan, the story that Jesus told of somebody who was traveling, was attacked by robbers, and several kinds of people didn't stop until the Samaritan. So it made a lot of difference if you can understand the culture of the day. The other point in terms of the gap is the historical gap. There is a whole wild, there is a lot of history. The Bible is made up of real stories of events and people that happen in actual places. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, the Bible as you have it today is not arranged chronologically. Okay, if you start from Genesis, maybe it looks like that, but towards the end or in the middle, you find out that the people who compiled it just thought, okay, the bigger the book, we'll put the big ones together. For instance, in the prophet, you find out that Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, the Ezekiel were together. Why? Because they would call them major prophet, and then the smaller ones minor. So you need to understand the history and put it together. Some people have made some good efforts of rearranging the way the Bible is organized, and there's actually a Bible called the Chronological Bible. It makes an attempt to put the stories together in the way they actually happen. So a book like the book of Job will actually occur somewhere around Genesis chapter 5 thereabout, because it's said to happen around that time. Again, it helps you to be able to understand the Bible more. The next gap is the geography gap. The Bible talks a lot about geography. For instance, in the Old Testament, a lot of mention is made of mountains, rivers. You cross the Jordan, you leave Canaan, you go to Egypt, then they move back, or the partitioning of the land for the 12 tribes. So all of those, they give us a lot of hints, and there is a whole lot of meaning that is under it if only we can take enough time to investigate it more. There is a lot of geography. You hear something like you went up or you went down, or you hear something like former rain, latter rain. That speaks of the weather. And if you can just take a little bit of time to investigate that, you will get a whole lot. Again, I don't have all the time to be able to give you illustration. I don't want to preach. I just want to be able to help you. Another one, which will be very, very interesting to you, has to do with the books, the chapters, and the verses. You see, the books of the Bible, when they were originally written, there were no chapters, there were no verses. But over a period of time, these were made as human innovations. Obviously, the people who introduced the chapters wanted to help. They were well-meaning, but sometimes these things may not help as much as they wanted it to. I'll give you one or two examples. Number one, I personally believe that the chapters were made to be convenient. So instead of Genesis, which has probably like 49 chapters, you don't want to read and not know where you have stopped, so you want to pause. It's practically impossible. It's possible, but maybe not for everybody to read the whole of that book in one sitting. So it's a lot easier to say, I've read 2 or 3 chapters. But if you flip it, it also makes us lazy. So much so that when we are supposed to sit down and read a whole letter at a go, we are reading it only one chapter, maybe a few verses. Okay? Beyond that, the people who put the book chapters put it there for convenience, and sometimes they are correct in the positioning of the chapters, but sometimes they are not. I'll give you an example of how the chapters may not help us. If you look at Luke chapter 15, for instance, Jesus told a parable of a man who had 2 sons. And of course, one of them got his inheritance, went away, spent all of it, and then he came back begging. Now, in my part of the world, if you grew up the way I grew up, we had a name for it. Immediately you mention that story, we call it the prodigal son. But that's not necessarily how God wants us to look at it. There were 2 sons, and you will get more value from it if you see it as 2 sons and 1 father. Immediately you say the prodigal son, your mind is blocked. You are only thinking about that child who spent all the money. You are not thinking of the other one who possibly has his own issues, and you can also learn from. So sometimes the topic, the headings they put on it, and tradition has a way of creating a barrier from understanding what the Bible is saying. If you read 1 Corinthians 12, for instance, you'll find that it says, now concerning spiritual gifts, I don't want you to be ignorant, and he writes about the gift. And then he stopped. So if you stop at that chapter 12 alone, and later on you come back to chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, and you must start with the mind that there is a connection between the last verse of chapter 12 and the first verse of chapter 13. So chapter 13 starts by saying, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but I don't have love, I'm like a sounding cymbal. Meanwhile, the last one says, pursue earnestly the best gift. So there is a connection. What I'm saying is, when you are reading chapters, in your mind, at the back of your mind, remove the chapters. Just read across so that you can get the connection. Otherwise, unnecessary barriers will be put in between. So as a wrap up, what am I saying today? I'm asking that you read the Bible book by book, and I'm asking that you get study aids that can help you to understand the Bible. And the best study aid is the Bible itself. But there are some Bibles that are called study Bibles because they give a note to each of the books. It explains to you the background and the key messages and what to watch out for. Beyond that, there are maps, there are atlases, there are book intros, there are commentaries, and I will be able to help you by sending you some of these things, maybe a book intro, maybe a synopsis of all the books of the Bible and the messaging that they are passing across. If you email me info@tennis.tv, I will be able and I will be more than happy to send you some of this material that will help you to understand the Bible. In the meantime, start reading the Bible, but read book by book. God bless you. See you next time.